The MoonBoard versus the Kilterboard. Now these are probably the two most common training boards you're going to find in your gym, but do they really have that much in common? The Kilterboard has an adjustable angle while the MoonBoard is fixed. Kilter has tons of jugs while the MoonBoard is covered with shitty holds. And finally, the Kilterboard is soft as hell while the MoonBoard actually makes me want to kill myself. For today's video, I recorded myself sending one problem from each grade, V3 to V7 on the MoonBoard and V5 to V9 on the Kilterboard, so that I can force you to take time out of your precious day to listen to my thoughts about each board. And of course, it wouldn't be a complete video for me if I didn't take some time to do some bitching about grade inconsistency. Now, if you've been a viewer of the channel for a while, you might be sitting there saying, why does it matter what the grades are, Zach? Just climb and have fun without worrying about the grades, Zach. First of all, you. I'll talk about grading if I want to. And second of all, I honestly just think it's pretty fun to compare grades, whether it's outside climbing, gym climbing, or board climbing. So yeah, kind of a long intro, but if you're still watching, make sure you like the video and subscribe for more coming up, and let's get into the actual climbing. Starting with the V3 on the MoonBoard, there really isn't that much to say besides, god damn, I still struggle on V3s and 4s on this board. It's crazy. You'll notice that even in the lower grades, I still tend to look pretty sloppy, which is actually one thing I really appreciate about the MoonBoard. There are so few good holds on this board that I find myself having to lock in on literally any climb I do because a mistake can easily put me on my ass, even with the lower grades. Now, comparing this to a V5 or a 6C on the Kilterboard, absolutely not the case. Sometimes I still look a bit shaky on these easier climbs, but that's just how it be sometimes. But for the most part, I find it quite easy to keep good and clean form. By the way, I chose to compare the grades this way with V3 to 7 on the MoonBoard and V5 to 9 on the Kilterboard just because it makes the grading difference so obvious, but also nobody wants to see me do a 3 on the Kilterboard. So moving on to the V5 Plus on the Kilterboard, I'm going to contradict myself by saying I actually kind of enjoy how easy and chill this board is sometimes. Just turning your brain off and letting your body move up the board without thinking much about technique is sometimes exactly what I need after a lot of hard training sessions. This can be frustrating when moonboarding because, like I said, you can fall on literally any problem regardless of the grade. But for me, I obviously would never be caught falling multiple times on such a low grade problem because that would just be embarrassing. Moving on to this V6 on the Kilterboard, there isn't a whole lot to say about it, but it did have some really fun movement. I really enjoyed this second move off the high foot because it made me feel like I was actually somewhat flexible for once, which I've been trying to improve on for the last while. Onto this V7, this brings me to a problem that a lot of people have talked about with the Kilterboard, as I found myself flashing this one super easy, even though it did have some big lock-off moves in the middle. Now, I promise, I'm self-aware enough to understand that if I was like 5'4" or shorter, this would probably be an impossible climb for me. But with the higher grades, every problem tends to become either massive moves or moves to footholds because almost every hold on the Kilterboard has just such a positive edge. This is especially noticeable when you're relatively tall and climb at anything 40 degrees or less, but I'd love to hear if you guys have a different take on this, so leave me a comment if you want to fight. Now, working this V5 on the MoonBoard made me realize just how much I need to work on my single arm lock-off strength. The third move on this one is going from a tough right hand to a bad left hand, which means when I don't get this controlled enough, I find my ass getting very familiar with the ground. This is something I've struggled with for a long time, so I'm really excited to get better at this as I continue moonboarding. V5 Plus had some similar movement where I tried to stay pretty static and avoid throwing the holds as much as I could, but it ended up actually having better holds than the V5 surprisingly. Also, I don't know how I forgot which hold I was supposed to use for my foot, but we're gonna pretend this didn't even happen. The send counts. Working on both of the Kilter V8s, I ended up really enjoying these individual problems. I really appreciate these longer climbs because it forces me to really map out the beta beforehand because I know I'll need to climb very efficiently if I want any chance at descent. This is something I tend to neglect because for some reason I just believe I have unlimited endurance or something, so it's great to get shut down for a little humbling from time to time on these. V8 Plus wasn't really that similar in length, but I did have to make sure I had my beta dialed to actually send this after falling a couple times on it. The MoonBoard has given me a lot of opportunities to work on really bad footholds all the time, so pushing off that vertical pinch felt okay to me, and I was able to stay on the wall to finish out the rest of the problem. V6 on here brings me to my final thing that I like about this board, which is just the variety of holds I get to use. There are so many terrible little pinches that are so unique that I just feel like I'm actively improving on every different aspect of my finger strength, which at the same time forces me to focus on my body positioning to make sure it's possible to even stay on the wall in the first place. Don't get me wrong, anytime I run into these bitch-ass vertical pinches, I want to immediately cancel my membership, but I know it's a necessary price to pay for greatness. Finally, it's time to talk about my greatest achievement in my entire life, which is sending this V7 on MoonBoard. Now, everyone knows that this board has the absolute worst baseboard feet. I was pretty certain it would be impossible for me to stick this first move without a quick cut, but it turns out working on my foot tension with the MoonBoard has actually helped me so much with my technique that I was able to static this, which is probably the biggest ego boost of my entire life. I knew the next couple moves on this climb were going to be pretty hard, but I didn't realize how hard I was going to have to fight for this one, so after I readjusted a million times on these crimps, it felt really good to finally get the send on this one. Of course, as it goes, I had to go and look through the comments to see how many people found this soft, but in fact, for the first time ever, people actually didn't think that the climb I sent was soft, except for this guy, but fuck him. With the final problem, I searched far and wide for a Kilter 9 that would be kind of my style so I could send, but also not flooded with comments about it being softer than a McDonald's ice cream cone. I ended up on Off the Rails, which has one of the coolest moves I've ever done, followed by some really reachy final moves. This kind of takes me back to this board just using big moves for hard grades, because even at 6 foot, I struggled so much on this last move, but overall, I actually really enjoyed this climb, had a lot of fun working on it, and coming back for another session a couple days later, I was able to flash. So there it is. That's every grade that I can currently send on the MoonBoard and the Kilterboard. To sum up my thoughts, I think it's really important to say that both of these boards are really useful for training and really solid training tools, especially if you are around my grade range, and you should definitely give them both a shot if you haven't yet. That being said, over the last 2 months, I've seen the biggest improvements overall working on the MoonBoard. So if you can get past the fact that the MoonBoard actually hates you and wants you to fail in general, then it's definitely worthwhile to start grinding the benchmarks. As far as grading goes, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter a whole lot, because if you're limit bouldering and working on your anti-style enough, you're going to continue to get better. But it is still crazy to me that I can literally climb 3 full grades higher on the Kilterboard. I think eventually they are going to try to add classics to the Kilterboard, kind of like with the tension board, which would help out a ton, but until then, just get used to feeling terrible about yourself reading all the comments on your favorite problems. Anyways, peace out everybody. See ya.